Hello, and welcome to We the Students, a political discussion sponsored by Nauset Regional High School's AP U.S. Government and Politics program, in collaboration with Nauset's video production class. The death penalty was reinstated by the Supreme Court in 1976. Since then, nearly 1,500 people have been executed in the United States, with another 2,700 awaiting execution on death row. The United States is one of 4 developed countries that still practices capital punishment, along with Japan, Singapore, and Taiwan. Opponents of capital punishment have long wanted to end the practice, and yet it remains legal in 30 states. Should the death penalty be abolished in the United States? That is the question our panel of government students will discuss over the next 30 minutes. I'm your host, Finnegan Tobin Brown, a senior at Nauset and a veteran of the AP Government program. Now, just for the record, opinions expressed here belong to the panelists and are not the views of the Nauset Regional High School or the Nauset Regional School District. Now, let's meet our panel. So, for the death penalty, we have Ava Berardi, Lindsay Cahill, and Matt Didoli. Against, we have Henry Gildehouse, Michael Whitney, and Cecilia Pekarsik. So, first question is, should the death penalty be abolished?
I think it was the other way around.
So, just go ahead.
Basically, I think the most glaring issue with the death penalty is basically that in the developed world, we are, as you said, we're one of the only first world countries that still does this. Mostly it's totalitarian regimes such as Yemen, Pakistan, China, and places that have live beheadings and such that still do this. And also, in America itself, it's growing less and less popular, and basically the majority of Americans want an alternative. So I think that it's just an issue of public opinion at this point.
The majority of American states still have the death penalty, though.
No, it's 61% want an alternative. They're not saying that.
But 30 of the states still have it and 20 don't.
Yes, but it's growing less and less popular.
It's just because it probably has been brought up to legislation yet within the states.
In the past couple of years, more and more states, it's been growing exponentially that they don't want the death penalty anymore.
Yeah, most countries, especially in Europe, have gotten rid of it, and I think it's just it's viewing our nation in a bad light, saying that, hey, the government kills people because killing people is wrong.
Henry, you think you have a response? That's all right. So, so quick question, actually. So, when it comes to the death penalty, there's a moral question, right? So, what defines a suitable crime to, punish someone by death? Anyone can answer this question.
I don't believe there is any suitable crime to punish somebody for death.
Why do you think so?
Because I think it's more of a punishment to give them life in prison where they lose all their rights and they're forced to.
If they're losing all of their rights, then they're losing their right to live.
Sorry, almost all of their rights except for very few.
Okay.
Well, they give up their right to live once they've murdered someone.
I don't believe they do. I don't understand why it's okay to kill someone just because they killed someone else or committed something like that. We've heard it since kindergarten, 2 wrongs do not make a right. If you punch your friend or you get punched by your friend, you're not supposed to punch them back. You're supposed to just talk to them about it and work it out or find other solutions other than violence.
It's also an issue of innocence. If you kill someone on death row and then it's later found out that they were not, they weren't guilty.
6% of convicted criminals come out as innocent.
One of those
6% is a pretty large percentage. That's 6 people out
and
of
that also
100
affects
people.
racial minorities and
6% is not a small number.
And it's 6% of 2 million.
So
Well,
that's
2 million
6 out of
people aren't being
100
sent to
people.
death row.
Yes, but still,
If there's a 6% chance that you are going to be innocent, that's a pretty high chance. You know that, right? So that 6 out of every 100 people are innocent and they were convicted.
Well, that's more of a problem with the justice system than of the punishment.
exactly,
The
it's more
justice
reason to
system
get
is-
rid of it.
The death penalty is part of the justice system.
Exactly.
So that's not a valid excuse.
I meant the the judicial process.
Yeah, well, the judicial process decides whether or not they get the death penalty. So I think it's just better if the person that is accused and is innocent is put in prison rather than having them killed and later finding out, they weren't guilty the entire time. And they could be acquitted.
Well, there's appeals process while they're on death row.
Well,
Exactly, but still, people die who are innocent.
exam-
Their lives are ruined.
An example of
The people who they
Gary
killed.
Graham. He was poor, 18 years old. He could be a senior in high school. I know my brother, senior in high school. He's 18 years old. He could be sent and put to death right now, and he was appointed attorneys because he didn't have the money to pay for it. And the attorney failed to bring up 2 eyewitnesses and failed to bring up the point that the gun he was carrying was not the murder weapon, so he was sent to death wrongfully in
And this-
2000.
And this issue also brings up the issue of race and poverty in the system, because many lawyers and judges or many lawyers aren't like equipped enough to handle this issue or handle the issue that they're assigned, because the people that are being accused can't pay for it.
The race issue, I can see how people could think that like a good part of our judicial system can become like racially biased, but since 1977, only 48.6% of the people were sentenced to death penalty were white, 40.9% were black, 8.9% were Hispanic, and 1.6% were other. And then the defendants that were actually executed, 56% of them were white, 35% black, 7% Hispanic, and 2% other.
Well, I don't
I'd
think
argue
that
that's
the race
still an
should matter. I think it's
overrepresentation.
more about the money and being able to hire a good lawyer to prove your innocence.
Lawyers are
Yeah,
being appointed
well,
to anyone.
Well, also to
Just-
that point, it's
That
also
doesn't mean
no
they're good.
matter
Yeah,
what,
that doesn't
those
mean they're
statistics
good.
you just
Flaw
put
with
out
the
are
lawyer,
also an
that's not a flaw with the death
overrepresentation.
penalty.
Once
It's an
again, that's a problem with the
overrepresentation.
public
Only
defender
12% of Americans, as of 2018, are African American, and 42% are on death row. That is obviously clear and
That's a big
present.
statistical difference between that.
There's still a large enough gap where you can't just like accuse the death penalty of being completely racially biased, because it's not.
Well,
It's
Well,
not.
also there's a point of the victims. If the victim, or it's shown that if the victim is white and also well educated, the accused is more likely to be put to death or to go on death row.
If there's really a fault in the system, I don't think that we should be putting people to death with a faulty system. We should improve the system first if you want to
Exactly.
keep the death
Yes.
penalty.
And how, actually, that's interesting that you bring that up. What would be, do you think, in your opinion, a proposed way to correct a flawed system?
Well, basically, you have to start at the root, which is the court system. A lot of these issues are basically the lawyers aren't being paid enough, and it's an issue where you have to go at the root, basically just the court system itself and not the death penalty. So I think once the court system is fixed, then the death penalty can be fixed. But until that happens, we have to get rid of the death penalty, because it's a big issue
Well-
with racial minorities and the poor.
I don't believe we should keep the death penalty at all, since if there is a flawed system right now, and if the flawed system allows innocent people to be put to death, I don't think that's right, because that is removing the innocent person's rights, and that we should not be doing in a first world country when we're one of the only 4 countries that still do it. That's a first world country.
Exactly.
Well, if the court system is flawed, you're still putting people in prison for life, which, as you said, according to you, is worse than putting them to
Yes,
death.
but
Well,
you
but
can
if you're put to
undo
death-
prison. You can't undo
Yes.
death.
Yes, exactly.
As soon as you're killed, you're dead. You lose all your rights. But if you're
That's
You
why
lost
we
all your
have-
rights
That's
when
why
you
we have the
committed the
judicial
crime.
process. of
Not if you're
appeals.
innocent.
Innocent
if
people
you're
are being
innocent,
put to
Such a
death. and
small
you're
number
just-
of people. Like, it's sad to say
6%.
that some people are going to be
6%.
innocent, but since it's just a flaw in the system
6%
that is
is not a small
happening,
And that
percent.
percent is
Matt,
decreasing
So how many
with
people
new
have
advances
to
in
die
technology.
innocent
But it's still
before we get rid of the
6%.
death penalty?
It's decreasing.
Well, there's still pros.
6% is still a
6%.
large number for margin of error. That 6% is a large number.
If 6%
Especially with
isn't
such
a large
serious
number, what
topic and
is?
such a serious situation, that's a large percentage.
I'd also like to bring up a point. In Louisiana, the odds of the death sentence were 97% higher for those whose victims were white than for those whose victims were black. And so that this is an issue of victims and the accused, so it's on both sides. And it's,
So I actually want to ask this one. So correlating the race issue, do you believe there's any way to somehow correct or some way justify, or not justify, sorry, replace a potential judge, or any way to find a way to, diminish the race issue?
Well, I think one of the big issues is there's that even on death penalty cases, there's juror misconceptions with and I think it's ridiculous that jurors are even being allowed on death penalty cases in the first place. But basically, there's
Why do you think that actually?
Because it's a very difficult issue, and I feel that actually I have notes on this somewhere there where it's saying that there are just misconceptions that the jurors believe, and they're not like they don't know enough about it to make an
That's the
informed
point of
decision.
having the jurors, though, is because they're supposed to be unbiased and like somewhat unfamiliar with it.
Well, I think
Well, that's the job of
if you're sending someone to death, you need 24 jurors in total, 10 for the conviction and 10 for the actual sentence. And I think that 24 people who are willing to send someone to death, like going into the trial thinking, yeah, I might send someone to death today, is already biased.
Well,
To one
the point is
side.
to have an unbiased jury. Though.
But you're creating
Yes,
a biased
but how do you-
situation if you do that.
Well,
If you go into a courtroom and you know that you have a chance of sending somebody to death, you're going to be subconsciously thinking about that, which is therefore creating a bias in the back of your mind, even if you don't admit it.
well, if you don't want to send someone to death, then that's
Then
still a
it's
possibility.
still a bias,
And
and
there's-
you still don't have an
There's
unbiased
even evidence
situation.
of lawyer bias. There's lawyers who have even been disbarred after they've put someone on death row. And I think it's just clear that the lawyers, I feel maybe there could be a pro bono lawyer who just helps a really good pro bono lawyer that helps these people that are accused have better representation. Also, there's the issue, I want to bring up cost. I feel like
I was actually just about to bring that up. Thank you for bringing that one up.
Yeah.
So for economics, the economic standpoint for the death penalty. So, what in general? This is an open question. In general, is the death penalty justified economically?
Yes, because on average it costs $700,000 to seek the death penalty as a lawyer. However, it costs $31,000 per year to keep someone in prison, so that's 22 and a half years.
Although that just may be looking at how much the death penalty actually costs, you have to think about all the other factors going into it, which would be taking all of those jurors out of their work to screen them and then put them through the trial. And then there's also the time they spend on death row, which is an average of 15 years as of 2010. They spend all that time on maximum security. They're not allowed to talk to guards, and they have to have lots of guards there. That's a lot more money than just normal prison.
And
I would also like to talk about the conditions of people on death row. Since the people on death row, they're only given 2 hours of activities a day, and they're given no contact to other prisoners, which I could consider a cruel and unusual punishment because
They
can
committed
be
a
in
cruel
that.
and unusual crime. Like,
But
once they do that crime, they have relinquished all
they
their
still
rights.
have the 8th Amendment right to no cruel and unusual punishments.
How would you define a cruel and unusual
I
punishment?
would define a cruel and unusual punishment 15 years of only having 3 hours a week of talking to a person, no contact, and having no contact with other prisoners except, and your only contact being guards and people that came into contact you for your 3 hours a
Okay.
week.
And then you
Okay,
mentioned
but-
a
And this-
cruel.
wait,
yeah, you
may I-
mentioned. Sorry, hey, hold on. You mentioned a cruel and unusual crime. I'm
If
actually
they
curious, what does
for
that mean?
example, like rape and kill an 11-month-old baby, that's pretty like cruel and unusual. Like people that commit these kind of crimes, obviously, like their rights are gone after that. Like
I don't
But I
But-
think it's an issue of like, in our world we're progressing. So obviously that's horrible. That no one is denying that. But I think it's just an issue. As Mr. Max says, people vote their pocketbooks.
they become
and in California, it costs California $4 billion, despite there only being 13 people on death row. $4 billion for 13 people. That is ridiculous.
Response?
Also, to add on that, if you want to save money in like jailing and you think that it's costing too much to jail people, so you should just kill them, you should look at all the money spent on people in jail who have gone to jail because of tax evasion, who aren't paying their taxes so they can live off of other people's taxes, and people who commit petty crimes to go to jail so they just have a roof over their head.
Also, let's talk about this. When you're on death row for an average of 15 years, and the longest was 40 years.
Yeah, 43
So,
actually.
43?
43, yeah.
43.
then what's the difference of them being on death row for 43 years or just serving life in prison?
Because, like I
that
said,
costs
more
more
harsh.
money.
and
Yeah.
also that they're restrictions and all that is way worse than a person who's on murder and who committed murder and is
Because
on
they're
life
deserving
in
those
prison.
restrictions.
But if you're in death row for murder and you're in it for, let's say, 35 years, compared to somebody who has life in prison and is in for life, you on death row, you aren't allowed to contact any other prisoners. You eat by yourself. You go out to the courtyard
Your
by
room doesn't
yourself.
have a
Because
window.
that
It has a
punishment
toilet and a
is finished.
sink.
Like that
But
punishment
if you're
I'd
in life
also
in
like-
prison, you can still contact other prisoners. You eat with other prisoners. You are in a cell with another prisoner. You have contact
the
with
inmates
other
on
people.
death row are deserving of that punishment because of their crimes.
I'd also
So are
like
you
to say
saying
that,
that because one person murdered somebody and got the death sentence, and another person murdered somebody and got life in prison, that
There's
they
different circumstances that come into the crime, though. Not every murder is going to be
Well,
put
what
on
are
death
the
what
row.
happens if it's in
Yes, exactly. Can you say the
Massachusetts,
Well, that's up
which
to
doesn't
the
have the
judge to
death
decide.
sentence, and
Yes, but okay.
a state that has the death sentence, you would say same crime, but just because they're in Massachusetts, they don't have the death sentence, that they should be given better circumstances than the person who's in the
It's an
same
arbitrary
Massachusetts
system.
sentence. Well,
And also, I'd like to say that the man, I think his name is Clarence Williams, he was on there for 43 years. Under federal statute, a person can be rewarded up to $100,000 per year on death row. 43 years. That's a lot of money.
Well, that was probably in one individual case.
Yes, one
Well-
individual case, and there are 165 people that have been acquitted from the death penalty.
and
because
Gary
of it.
of Lord, he died at age 66 after 40 years in prison, not from the death sentence, but from he was psychological ill and he died from natural causes. He died from natural causes in prison because it took so long before he even was given the death sentence.
So I had another question actually. So when it comes to paying, so if let's say there is no more death penalty, right? So now we have life in prison. Is that what you're? Okay.
Yes.
So we have life in prison. So when it comes to paying for that, do you think it would be suitable for taxpayers to pay for their service as life in prison, and then also what commodity should those prisoners be given?
Yes, it
Well-
would, because with the death penalty, that money can be used to build security for prisons and give the prisoners, like, generally better circumstances. Because in many prisons in America, there are awful circumstances despite the crimes that they've committed.
Not to mention they could use the money that they save from the death penalty on programs that may help cut back on crime and stop people from going to jail in the first place.
Exactly.
Also, in a lot of states already, they don't have the death penalty, so we're already paying for it with our taxes.
And I'd like to add on to
Majority
that
of the
that
states still have
the states that don't have the death penalty have lesser rates of crime.
They-
They do.
I have
And
a graph if you wanna see
we
it.
both have graphs. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. And in Canada, they got rid of the death penalty, and their crime has been steadily decreasing in an entire country.
Well, do you know that
Well,
that's because they got
Still-
rid of the death penalty?
First
or
world country as an example
That might
got
just
rid of
be-
the death penalty.
due
Well,
to external factors?
I feel that you could make that point if it were just like a state like Illinois, but it's not isolated. An entire country, it's just the numbers speak for itself.
Well, the crime rate overall in the U.S. has gone down too, but
Exactly, but I'm saying that the numbers
It
are
has a
very
possibility to go
clear.
down even more.
So that was actually interesting. You talked about the crime rate. So with the crime rate being so low, would you guys say that with the death penalty still in place, would you agree that it would act as a strong deterrent, and getting rid of that could potentially lead to more crime, or what would you guys think?
There's obviously a strong link between executions and reduced murder rates, even if some of the states that have the death penalty have higher murder rate. Like that, it just goes on a state-by-state basis. But like capital punishment, if people commit or like are thinking of committing a murder and they think about it and they realize like I could be put to death for this, like there's a chance that they might just not do it because do they really feel like it's worth murdering someone to this extent that they would die for it?
But where are your statistics to prove that?
There-
Yeah, that's
Wait,
all
there's-
hypothetical.
there-
Right there, what
Where are
you
your
just said is all
statistics to
hypothetical.
prove that that is the case? We have facts on our side.
Okay.
Any other response?
well, I think that the death penalty serves not as more of a deterrent as a punishment. That if you do something that warrants the death penalty, you should not be allowed in
It
society.
actually
I would
brings
like to bring
sympathy
up
to
a
the
point
criminal.
that-
Come-
So, 5 states still have the electric chair. Would you guys say that is a cruel and unusual punishment? Killing somebody by shocking them to death?
Well, the method of execution is a gray area, but
It's a gray area, Mikey. Would you like to explain that?
well, because it's hard to find the correct way to execute someone humanely, but it's still, the execution is what's important, because if they have done something to warrant the execution,
Well,
then
There's actually
You
a
can't-
Supreme
Well,
Court case.
if you can't find a way to execute somebody humanely, why do you
Well,
still want
well,
to
I think,
what's
I
the-
think Lindsay had a good
Yeah.
point.
What would be a proper way to execute?
Lethal
No
injection.
way
find a
that it
painless
shouldn't be
way.
allowed.
Lethal
Just-
injection.
just
Okay.
on this side,
A
just for this
painless
There's a
way.
way to
What
do
is a
it
painless way?
Lethal injection.
Lethal injection.
Lethal injections can still
Oh,
go
yeah.
severely wrong if they miss the vein, which can cause even more pain than
There's-
a lot of the other ways
and
of
how
execution.
There was a
often does that
man.
happen,
There was a
Matt?
man
I do
who
not
was
know how
actually.
often
It took
that
him.
happens.
It took them 30 minutes to kill him, and he died of a heart attack. It took. They had to do lethal injection twice to kill him. That is cruel and unusual punishment, and it violates the right to life.
He's lost that right. Like he just.
Once
Yes,
these
but it
criminals
doesn't
commit
matter.
these terrible crimes, they lose their right to life, liberty, and happiness. If you
But
deprive
it's
someone
sending
else
a
of those
message
rights,
about our
you
nation
yourself
that
don't
is-
deserve them.
No, it's sending a message about our nation that is clearly unconstitutional because.
It's not.
It's not.
The
The
death
Supreme Court
penalty-
has ruled that it is constitutional.
But it's highly argued
And the
that it
Supreme
is.
Court has ruled a lot of
Okay, but
things
it's
that have
not
been overturned at
unconstitutional.
later times.
No law is set. Like,
Well, it's
if you
already
look at
been
Plessy
overturned
versus
that it is
Ferguson,
not
it was
cruel and
overturned by
unusual
Brown
punishment.
versus Board of Education.
No.
No amendment or law is set law.
We have already overturned the death penalty as
And it
cruel
can be
unusual
overturned again.
punishment.
No,
But
it's
it
saying
hasn't been.
The government
But
kills
it
people
can be.
because killing people is wrong.
Yeah.
What does that send? That message is just ridiculous and hypocritical.
Do you think it sends the message that killing's okay?
In a first world developed country, having
In
our
a- yes.
national government kill somebody, do you think that's sending a good message?
Well, I think they're more
It's-
proponing towards the reactionary thing. So it's like after they commit the crime, and it's more about the discussion is after you commit the crime, whatever that may be, is it still justified after that? So I think they're arguing not exactly for that, but more so towards the actual punishment. But I was still wondering. So is it only murder and rape that you're
Really
Well,
just
in some cases, treason could also warrant the death penalty, something
Treason,
like
okay.
that.
treason.
Our
There's
country
also-
is built on
Anything that-
treason and breaking away from Britain.
I'd also
Like, if you're gonna, you can't kill someone because if you do have the death penalty, I think that you have to have murdered someone or taken someone else's life to have your own life taken.
Yeah, then that's.
I would
That's
also
our point.
That's our
what.
point.
I
No,
would
it's
also
an
like to say
arbitrary
that
system.
if a lot of people on death row have been proven to be mentally ill and taken off. Do you think it's fair to put a mentally ill person to death?
People that are mentally ill aren't allowed to be put to death.
I
it's
think
a
that
vague, it's a vague
anyone-
issue, and they still have to prove that the person's mentally ill, and that's not always the case. And mentally ill people are still put to death.
Anyone who plans and gets up in the morning and thinks that they're gonna go kill someone today or go kill a group of people has some sort of mental illness or emotional instability.
Well, you can't just like assume that everyone that commits this kind of murder or something like that, that they're like so messed up in the head that they don't deserve to receive the death penalty. Like,
And
So
I
would
would
you-
like
you
to
would
say that
put
what you
a
just said
mentally
about
ill
mentally
person-
ill people on the death row
because they're
is a
not-
false fact because Gary Alvarado suffered from psychophilia and was on death row. So and
was
died.
he put to death?
Yes.
Well,
Yes, exactly.
unfortunate.
Exactly, because it's not just that these people are being put to death, it's because the system is allowing it. And I think that's ridiculous.
Just a flaw in the system.
It's a flaw in the
Well, if you
system.
have a flaw
Thank
in
you
the
very
sys-
much.
Okay, let's go
It's
back
a
to your
flaw in the
6%.
system.
Well, we're not
flaw-
talking about
if
the
there's a
system, we're
flaw
talking
in the
about the
system
punishment
that can
itself.
Yes,
have
but the
the chance
system
of
is
having
part of the
6%.
punishment. It is a root. It roots all roots back to the court system, and since the court system is flawed, the death penalty is going to be flawed. And until we fix that, we can't have the death penalty because it's ridiculous.
It's not.
It is.
Well, how
So-
would you fix the court
well-
system then?
Okay.
Well,
let's-
that's a deeper issue.
We kind of already discussed that one. But when it does come to, you said 6%. So with
6% was CC's. You were the one that mentioned 6%.
right, but
Still
so when it comes to
under-
when it comes to the 6%, what if some people don't want to have to pay for a criminal's life sentence?
Well, in certain states they're already paying for it. It's just a
But
tax.
nobody wants to pay
The
with their
government's-
taxpayer money to put someone.
Well, what happens if you don't want to
Exactly.
pay
Prison.
put your taxpayer money
To leave
towards
someone in
putting
prison
But it
someone
would-
to
for their entire
death?
life.
The taxpayers would benefit the taxpayers to put them in life in prison rather than.
So
it-
that's kind of
Wow.
that's kind of what
Yes.
I'm getting a little bit towards is would you guys say that as a compromise in a sense that it could be more of a state law versus a federal law, the death penalty? What do you guys think?
Well, I personally believe the death penalty violates the 8th Amendment, which is, I consider the death penalty cruel and unusual punishment.
Right, but do you
So
think
that would
it's a
fall
big
under
difference
federal.
between
It
federal
would be
or
a
state?
federal
Therefore,
law.
I believe that the
Okay,
federal
but the-
government should protect life and stop the killing of citizens.
Okay,
Yes,
what do you guys
exactly.
think?
Okay,
If a criminal kills
Those are
someone else, and
citizens.
They're
deprives
still a
them
citizen.
of-
Here, let's hear from Henry. Go ahead.
If a criminal kills someone else and deprives them of their life, their rights, their right to life, they themselves don't deserve the right to life anymore. They give that up when they commit
But what if the
terrible
person is
crimes.
innocent? You don't know if
Yeah,
the
what
person is
happens if they're
innocent or
falsely
not.
accused?
We're
Because
talking
that
about people
6%.
actually
like,
killed.
undoubted like proof, that person will be like deserved to put to death.
Exactly. I would like to bring that up again because you say that it has to be undoubted, right? Well, there are still many people in that are on death row, 1,400 to be, or around 1,400, that there is reasonable doubt that they could be innocent, and it is a lawyer's job to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, and that is just not the case that's happening right now.
The jurors are meant to convict beyond a reasonable doubt.
Yes, but the jurors have biases, and it's an issue.
Jurors are
Just
supposed
a-
to be unbiased.
Even
But
in
they're still
cases,
biased,
Exactly,
like we
but you
stated
can't
earlier.
Just because you're supposed to be something doesn't mean you are.
but still, even in cases with a three-judge panel, people are still still put to death, even without a jury. So it doesn't matter whether the jury is biased or not, because in many cases it's the judges.
Sometimes the judges are biased. Yes, and it's
There's no like you can't just change that. Like people are going to hold their own opinions on things, and like it's going to influence the way they think. And of course, having an unbiased judiciary system would be ideal, but that's not what it is, and that's not a big enough reason to just abolish the death penalty
So
altogether.
if you're saying that because we have a bias, so there is a flaw, will you admit there's a flaw?
There can sometimes be a flaw.
On a case-by-case
So
Yes,
basis.
if there's
but
a
if
flaw
there-
and
if there's
there's
a
a
chance of a
6%
flaw,
chance that
yes.
somebody's innocent, that's 6 out of 100 people and that's a pretty high percentage. We can all agree, right?
yes.
So if
What do you
six-
think
It's an
Yeah,
over
yeah,
high
what would you
percentage,
consider
no
a high
matter
percentage
what. What's a
then?
high percentage? Over 50? How many people have to die?
Yeah. How many people have to be falsely
answer that.
convicted?
Well, obviously, a 0% would be ideal, but
But when it's 6%, that's 6%
6%
higher
is
than your ideal
ridiculous.
0%.
So what's a low enough percentage then? What would be, I guess, a low enough?
1, 2.
So only.
That's 1% of people.
So you'd
that
want
are
like.
I don't-
I don't think there's an
perfection.
exact number.
You're
you can
not going to
give.
get near perfection for that. That's
But when
Exactly.
it's at 6% right now, I think that's unreasonably high.
But there's a point where it's so imperfect that it's just unconstitutional.
Does it justify
It's not
eradicating
unconstitutional, though,
the
'cause
death penalty?
It does,
though?
because this should be a federal issue, not just an issue at the states where people can just because states. It should be a federal issue because it's. I lost it.
So you believe it should be instilled at a federal level, not just the state?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. What about you guys?
It's just the court has never once suggested that the death penalty itself, altogether as a category, is impermissible.
Well, didn't they
So
have
it's
to
not
didn't the Supreme
highly
Court have to re-add it like in a court case?
In the
wasn't
court
it?
decision that did that, I believe the court decision you're referring to was a 6-3 decision. It wasn't unanimous.
Gonna have to hold it here, guys. I'm sorry. Unfortunately, we are just about out of time, so we'll have to hold our discussion here. We thank Nauset High School's television production class and Lower Cape TV for making this valuable experience for all of us. That concludes another segment of We the Students, a political discussion sponsored by Nauset Regional High School's AP U.S. Government and Politics program. I'm Finnegan Tobin Brown. Thank you for watching.